In this series, we've been exploring the divine portrait of framing the art of kingdom marriage. In our previous episode, we looked at what it happens when the image is broken, when it's tainted, when it's distorted, and we focused that on looking at the masculine, male side of the equation. In today's episode, we're going to be getting right in to looking at the image of God reflected in marriage, particularly with our female counterpart, with the ladies, and what it looks like when the image has fallen within the feminine gender's expression of the image of God. But we're not going to leave it at just the fallen side. We're going to look at how to redeem that, what the restorative art looks like in it. So I hope you hear from the Lord today. I hope you become even more established in the faith so you can live out your full potential as a kingdom citizen. Let's go. All right, Mark, once again, you're back at the Kingdom Citizen Podcast. I'm so excited to have you here as a pastor, as a teacher, and as a trusted friend to deal with a pretty unique subject to talk about for two dudes in their 50s with bullhorns in the background.
Yeah, everybody wants to have two men talk about women.
That's exactly.
Is that anything more obnoxious than that, Kevin?
But what they won't know about you and I, and just to pat ourselves on the back a little bit, we talk about a lot of these issues when we're out fly fishing or on a small river, with some skinny water, or when we're talking about issues of people that we love and trust. And we both have raised strong, powerful daughters and have really strong, impactful, connecting women that we're married to. Yeah. So we're watching this, but man, we're in it with all in on raising up dynamic women in her life.
Absolutely. In fact, you even saying that just reminded me of a conversation Lisa and I had a long time ago. I just remember we were driving from Little Rock to Albuquerque in one day with four little kids sleeping in the back of the van. And we were talking about these things. And I mentioned the kinds of things that, like we've been talking about in Divine Portrait, that I want to pass on to my sons. Yeah. And Lisa said, hey, that's great. But have you noticed your oldest child is a daughter?
Oh, okay.
How do these things play out in a woman's life? And really, for the first time, there was this aha of, that doesn't just have to be Lisa's assignment. Yeah. I mean, Lisa obviously can model and describe and showcase what godly femininity looks like. But I hope we believe that the scriptures have something to say about it too.
You betcha.
And it's good for us to sit around and unpack that together, both as men and women. Yeah,
and understanding who we are as men and being sensitive to the dialogue we're going to have.
Sure.
There's a responsibility in our initiation to understand these things the best that we can and address them with revelation from God's word back to that calling, and then make sure that the feminine expression of the image of God doesn't stay just in the falling side,
right?
But get back to that calling, just like we addressed the men in our previous episode. So I think this is going to be great for all the kingdom women that are out there to say, remind me of my calling. Help me understand what has fallen and get that restorative art as we paint out that divine picture. I'm excited for what our ladies can gain through the conversation we're going to have back to God's word today.
Well, let's recap real quickly, just in case somebody didn't catch the first couple of episodes. So that first set of circles talks about the design, the calling, Genesis 1 and 2, before no sin. A man made in God's image reflects a little bit more of the strength of God in the way he initiates and care. And at the same time, a woman made in God's image reflects a strong way, more of the mercy of God in the way she follows and completes him. We did see in that second set of circles, we saw almost the script flip in his life. He went from initiative to care to passive and dominant. Almost exact opposite in Genesis chapter 3.
Yeah.
What happened in a woman's life? Now, this is where I can kind of almost chastise my own profession and brothers in my own profession. Right. If you've gone to any local church and Mother's Day comes before Father's Day, you hear a Mother's Day sermon that always sounds like, women, you're amazing. Yeah. And they are amazing.
Of course.
Sometimes in some churches, they'll even say, the Boy Scouts are out in the foyer and have carnations for sale, right? Yeah. And it's just this talk to women like there is no fall. Yeah. Just only the beauty and the power and the dignity. All that's true. It's just not the complete truth. Yeah. And then we turn around on Father's Day. The sermon sounds very different. And we say to men, listen, guys, truth is you're the root of the problem. In fact, we got to fix the men because it's obvious you're all only broken. Yeah. And that's not a true story. There is broken masculinity, but that's not the only truth.
Yeah.
And there is dignified femininity, but that's not the only truth. Calling and falling are in both genders. I struggle with the way that we in the church have kind of avoided that issue with women for two reasons. Number one, I don't think it honors women.
Yeah.
I think it treats women like...
It's patronizing.
I think so. I think it's almost like you can't handle the whole truth, so we're just going to pretty it up and skirt the issue.
You bet.
We know Genesis 3 is there for women too.
Oh, yeah.
Second thing is I don't think it's honest for women, because most good women that I know, they know their husband has issues. He's a son of Adam, right?
Yeah.
He can be a real son of Adam. But they also know she's a daughter of Eve.
Yeah.
And they know that in their own hearts. And there has to be a way we can talk in an honest, honoring way about Genesis 3. So let's do that.
Yeah.
We look at the Genesis 3 story, and we know that the scriptures gave unique curses to the man and the woman, which is no surprise because God uniquely created them.
Yeah.
To the man, we know that mostly his impact was cursed. The fact that his work would not work anymore, and yet he would still have to go to work.
Touched his primary purpose.
Yeah. At the same way, it does the same for women.
Okay.
And yet it's only one verse for women, but it's a doozy of a verse. And it's verse 16 of chapter 3. And it says, to the woman, God said, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children. But then there's a second sentence. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. And you begin to look here and see what is the effect of the curse on the feminine soul.
Okay.
I know that clearly it says it's pain in childbirth, and you and I have zero to say about that, right? We have watched our wives go through the pain in childbirth. We have no idea what it's like to understand it. I joke with Lisa and say, oh yeah, I know, I was there. I felt it too, and she knows that there's just no such thing. Even the whole reproductive cycle has a touching of pain. We know that I think it's 15%, 1 in 6 couples in America cannot conceive or bring a child to full term. So there's pain in this whole process of not just childbearing, but even the reproductive cycle itself. And then you ask most people, what is the curse of God for sin upon a woman? And they will say pain in childbirth. Yeah. And they're right. It's just not the whole truth.
Yeah,
there is a second sentence. And the second sentence is, your desire will be for your husband, yet he will rule over you. And KP, here is where you and I wish the word desire meant what we want it to mean. We want it to mean that our wives would always just be
ooh and ah,
and super warm and attracted to us. And it's just not what it means. We know that word desire means something differently. In fact, Kyle and Delitzsch were Old Testament commentators from multiple generations ago, previous century. And they say that the best Hebrew or English word equivalent to this Hebrew is the word overtake. Other commentators will use the word control. How do we know that? Well, we know that because Genesis chapter 4, verse 7 is the next time that exact Hebrew word is used. And it's used when Cain is filled with jealousy over Abel. And God says to Cain, sin's desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Same parallel. Coupling of words as chapter 3 to Eve. Sin's desire was not just to be attracted to Cain. It was to control Cain. It was to overtake him. And God says, you've got to master that. Now to Eve, he says this. God says, your desire, your appetite to overtake him, your desire to control him is for your husband. But he's going to rule. Remember, we said that was harshly. He will try to have established dominance over you. And you see this competition between the sexes, between the genders set up even in marriage. And I think even played out beyond marriage in intimate relationships.
It probably has the most devastating effects to bring a competition into marriage. I mean, to compete academically is fine, to compete in the workplace, in the marketplace, but this sense of competition on who controls, who's lording over the other one is on the destructive side. And if there's no room for that level of competition in that art picture of marriage.
And that interesting thing, so just like a man was cursed in that unique way he was created, his identity, think about a woman was created. She's created for far more than just relationship. Far more leadership and impact in her life happens than just relationship. But primary,
Yeah.
is this sense that she was in chapter 2, created for her husband. And then chapter 3, she's going to be named Eve, the mother of all living things. So God highlights her mothering and her marriage. What's cursed in verse 16? Her mothering and her marriage.
Gotcha.
The very place of her identity is the very place now tainted by sin and its fall. If I were to use common words to this sense of desire, just like in that first set of circles, we see that she's created to follow that man and join him in that commission, and she's created to complete him. You flip that directly to the opposite, and we see the fall in Genesis chapter 3 move to a sense of control, a battle for control, or even independence from that man. And where do you see independence? Well, in the fact that once sin hit, the first thing she does is pull away from him and hide from him and want to be independent from him. And you see control in the fact that God said, listen, you are going to have an appetite. You're going to want his headship, his leadership. You're going to battle for that place that God has created him to have. And every woman has pockets of that sense of control.
Yeah, I think it's good for a kingdom woman to recognize is to say, okay, this tendency, this emotion, where is it coming from? And to trace that back to that root and then say, okay, is this supposed to be in the divine portrait?
Right.
Is this askew? Is this something that needs to be corrective or restored?
Yeah.
To recognize it, know its root and see where it's coming from. I
Right.
think that's healthy.
And not only that, even it's sometimes a woman, if she's been created with a stronger leadership personality, maybe you're a certain number on the Enneagram that might tint that way, or a certain kind of on the disc profile, she's a stronger, more dominant personality. That's a good thing. That could be a God-shaped personality trait in her. And she might find herself saying, well, that's just who I am.
Yeah.
My husband needs to deal with that. That's not honest nor honoring to her. She needs to say, that might be my temperament and how God shaped me, but he still designed me to become this empowering sense of a counterpart. We talked about that mirror opposite to my husband, where I empower him rather than compete with him.
The complete, not compete.
That's huge. I don't think that's the same as saying every woman is only controlling. We don't say every man is only passive. That's just not true. Those generalizations aren't helpful. But every woman has some pockets out of her own soul that she pulls from that wants to control with her husband. Maybe those pockets are deeper if she's had certain baggage, maybe a certain kind of father wound or a certain kind of dad she saw, a dominant dad or an aggressive dad or abusive dad. Maybe it does come with some temperament shadings. But no matter her Enneagram number or anything else, there is a tendency to want to compete with her husband rather than complete him. One of my wife's favorite series of movies came, it's one of them, I think, goes back to the early 2000s of My Big Fat Greek Wedding. And there's that famous little scene where the two women are talking and they say, no, we'll never get him agreed to that because we know that he thinks that the woman or the man is the head of the house. And the wife turns to her daughter and says, oh no, the man may be the head, but the woman is the neck and she can turn the head any way she wants. And Lisa laughs at that and she'll say, there's not a woman who doesn't innately know that. That you can learn to push the buttons. And that can have a hard side of control, just like our passivity can have a real weak or an over-aggressive side. It can have a soft side. I've known women who can control the temperature of the relationships that they're in by always playing helpless. Always playing kind of the nice, soft, hostess, and I'm essential and you always need me in the background. I can keep this relationship under control. I've known the angry liberationist. The Proverbs talk about the seductress who uses even her physical beauty to control and move a man. Proverbs later, Solomon is coaching his son in marriage, and he says, it is better for a man to live on the corner of a roof, I think in Proverbs 21, than with a contentious woman. Wife. Contentious doesn't mean a bad woman. But it means one that's competing with it. And then it's 10 verses later, Kevin, he changes his mind. He's like, no, son, you could still hear her on the corner of the roof, so it's better to go to a desert land than to be in a home with a contentious woman. And the point is, you'll see men pull away from their wives. They'll either live in the corner of a roof, they'll stay in the garage too much, they'll stay on a computer too much, they'll stay behind a video screen too much. Or the travel pick up extra business work. They'll do long distance hobbies. They'll do something rather than be close.
Yeah. And when you see that happening, and sometimes you recognize it quick, sometimes it slips up on you. It takes a while to recognize it, but then you know you're living outside of the portrait, that divine portrait, something that is separating us. It's causing us to live apart emotionally, physically, in whatever different way. When that tendency is recognized or that reality is recognized, okay, something's not right here.
Yeah.
And there's a root to it. There's a cause to it. In my passivity or in a competition that has crept in, that contention causes me to want to live on a corner of the roof.
So let's go there a little bit on those two patterns you saw. Yeah. Sometimes a man's passivity and a woman's sense of control, they start to play off each other.
Okay.
Almost like a chicken and the egg cycle. Okay. So if we were to throw up those two diagrams again, we could see a vicious cycle take place between the two of them. I cannot tell you whether it's my passivity that causes Lisa to sometimes want to over-control a situation, or if it's Lisa's tendency to over-control a situation that causes my passivity. Okay. I feel like that's debating whether what came first, the chicken or the egg. I think a healthy couple just needs to acknowledge there's a chicken and an egg.
Yeah.
And probably the healthiest couple needs to decide if they're the chicken, they're going to own being a chicken. And if they're the egg, they're going to own being the egg. Yeah. Meaning, and there's a phrase we use in the marriage ministry in our church where we say the best thing any couple can do is draw a circle right around themselves and then decide to work on everybody in the circle.
Yeah.
And so Mark has to deal with Mark's issues in a marriage. And if I've been overbearing and dominant, if I've been passive, I've got to own that and work on that. Lisa has to work on Lisa. Because the truth is, we don't have marriage problems. And I've never met a couple that has a marriage problem. I've met a wife who has problems with her soul, and I've met a husband who have problems with his soul, and it's showing up in their marriage.
I've heard you say it like, probably don't have a marriage problem. You probably have a me problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's probably what I have.
And when we can go, and by the way, that's very Jesus-like. I mean, that's the same thing he would say in the Sermon on the Mount. Let's say you've got an issue going on with somebody. He says, I want you to assume you have the log in your eye and they have the speck in theirs.
Yeah, let's remove that first.
Right. Yeah. And here's the wild thing is I'm convinced Lisa's the one with a telephone pole sticking out of her face and I've got a little sawdust in my eye. My perspective is that her issues are bigger. Yeah. That's the blame game. Back to Genesis 3. We've got to own where our side of the diagram. So when a couple is stuck in that vicious cycle where his passivity is pushing her control buttons or her control is pushing his passivity, the best thing they can do is say time out.
Okay.
We're not going to look across that diagram. We're going to look at ourselves. I'm going to draw a circle around me and ask the Holy Spirit to begin changing me.
Instead of digging the hole deeper by continuing blaming, continuing competing, and raising up the high level of contention, it's to call time out, right?
Yeah.
Pause, draw that circle and say, let's get to work right here on me.
Yeah.
Well, what's my responsibility in this situation?
So to bring some of that home, I was thinking about, Lisa and I taught at a marriage conference for another ministry in our hometown. And because it was our hometown cross country, we got to know another couple through mutual acquaintances. Okay. And I had been meeting with them between sessions to work on some stuff that it really had become pretty toxic.
Okay.
I mean, they had the same argument for 10 years and it had gotten more intense and more intense and more intense. And they were now wondering, could we even stay together?
Yeah.
In fact, their line was, we're only still married while the children are in the home.
Okay. Gotcha.
So the truth is they were functionally or emotionally divorced, but just not functionally divorced.
The vision was low. Really low.
They were surviving. And they made some movement that weekend.
Okay.
And I said, let's touch base on the phone once or twice. You need to plug into your own people, your own community, but we can have a couple more conversations. So a couple of weekends after that conference, we were on the phone, and I said to him, how's it going? And he said, fine. And I said, really? So that thing we were talking about that had created this 10-year pattern is fine.
Fine.
And he said, yep. And I said, okay. And in the distance, I hear in the background his wife's voice. And she says, who's on the phone? And he said, it's that guy who taught the marriage conference.
Yeah. Okay.
And she screams in the background. I heard it very loud. Tell him. You tell him right now. You tell him, or I'll grab that phone and I will tell him.
Oh, no.
Now, I struggle with the same stuff he struggles with.
Yeah.
And every part of me was going to be like, hey, man, I hope you just have a great day and enjoy your weekend and disconnect, right?
Yeah.
And instead, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, what do I do with this? And I said, hey, bud, I bet you know I could probably hear that.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, he was embarrassed. I said, all right, can I ask you again, how's it going? He said, not good.
Shit.
I said, what's going on? He said, I don't know. And I said, well, what would she say is going on? And he said, I don't know. I said, have you asked her? And he said, what would I say? Now, here's the deal. I don't know what he should say.
Yeah.
I've got my own marriage to work out that art.
Yeah.
But I'm winging it. And I say, why don't you do this? Just put the phone down for a quick second and ask her what she needs of you most.
Okay.
It's the only thing that came to my mind. He came back no less than 20 seconds later. It didn't take long. And he said, well, she says she just needs me to talk to her because she's tired of being so lonely.
Okay.
And I started freezing. We talked about some things, and I gave him a couple things to work through. But when I hung up the phone, this is what caught me. They were caught in a vicious cycle.
Okay.
His passivity had drifted away from her. It had heightened this incredible fear of disconnection in her.
Yeah.
Again, if she's created for this sense of completing him, distance is
big gap.
Is terrifying. How did she deal with her fear?
Yeah.
Coming on super strong and controlling it. What did that do to his desire for distance? He'd moved from the corner of a roof to the desert land.
Places, yeah.
And they were just stuck in this cycle. So how does a couple like that get out of it? Here's the good news. On our own, we cannot.
Yeah.
And this moves us to gospel-centered marriage.
Yeah.
And this moves us to the New Testament commands. And this is where the fun begins for any kingdom citizen.
Yeah, you betcha.
We can take that there next time.
I think for any of us who've been married for more than a few days, we understand that contention can rise up and start to distort the divine picture of the image of God reflected when a man and woman come together in that oneness. For you kingdom women that are watching this, God has so much for you to add in. And if you find yourself in a place where you're not understanding that sense of purpose, where you feel like you've been painted into a corner by what culture or even well-meaning or not well-meaning ministers or people or leaders have painted you in and boxed you into something that's outside of the calling we see in Genesis 1 and 2, we want you to find that freedom. There are ways to back out of that corner and live in that calling beyond the falling, that we can truly live out that beautiful restorative picture. In our upcoming episode, we're going to talk about the image being redeemed. So now, take what you learned today and go out in the world and be in it, but not of it.